Wow, such a pleasure, and I am very impressed at the full house we have here on Friday almost afternoon. So welcome, Radhika. Nice to chat with you.
Thank you for having me. It's a pleasure to be here.
I always love talking about innovation. I like thinking outside the box. I've been always a bit of an out of the box thinker. And so we're going to have a great conversation talking about innovation. And we know that our industry here is to serve our customers, but we tend to have a bit of a conservative industry. I want to ask you, Radhika, if you can think about the biggest obstacles that might be getting in the way of Canadians having control over their money.
It's a great question, and I think it's something that's on the mind of every Canadian, because money is such an integral and personal part of people's lives. Having control of the money you earned, being able to have access to it real time, being able to move it where you want and take those actions, I think is something we often hear from our customers. And personally, I've always felt it's my money. I should be able to do what I want with it, and why are there all these restrictions upon me? So I think there's a few things that would really enable and provide Canadians with more control over their money. One that's obviously super topical is the idea of choice and portability. I think if Canadians had more choices for where they could put their money, where they could invest their money, how they could spend it and store it, that just, in a way, gives them a set of features and controls that they wouldn't happen. And choice, of course, is created through competition. And competition and more options exist when there are less hurdles or potentially barriers for people to access and create new businesses or access the market. So the idea of introducing, I think, open banking and real-time rails, which makes it possible for new businesses to provide services to Canadians while still remaining compliant, providing security, I think it is a huge hurdle, and something that, once it's introduced, will give Canadians more control over their money. And through open banking, as we've heard, the idea of portability, I think, is going to give Canadians so much more control over their money. If you think back to early 2000s, mid 2000s, when your phone number wasn't portable, and if you signed up with one provider, that was what you had to use for life. And if the fees changed, if the features changed, you didn't really have a choice as a Canadian. But through wireless number portability, you can now move your phone number to another provider, which feels like such an obvious thing, and we take it for granted now, but at that time was pretty revolutionary. And through that, Canadians had choice. They were able to choose a service provider that made sense for them. They were able to, there was more competition, which made fees come down. And so the same concept with financial services, where you put your money, how you bank, how you invest, I think is going to create a ton more control for Canadians for how they manage their money. So that's one big area. The other one, which doesn't seem as maybe less of a hurdle, but something that I think any individual can start to do and institutions can start to help with, is often people talk about financial literacy. And I think that term is almost oversimplified to people should learn how stock markets work, how investments work, things like that. But in my mind, and actually at Wealthsimple, something we're trying to do is remove the intimidation factor around finances and investing, making it easier to talk about money, making concepts that seem complex and abstract really simple. And so I think removing intimidation, making financial services accessible and easy to understand will also help improve the comprehension around the options Canadians have, so that they can take more control over their money as well. And then the last one in my mind is around access. I think there are a lot of ways that people can manage their money or even invest their money to grow it that aren't always available to everyone. Sometimes you have to have, qualifying minimums. You need to be at a particular wealth level to access those investment options. And so by creating more access to some of the investing tools or the products that people use, that'll also, I think, give Canadians more control over their money. And these are all things that, I think we're trying to tackle at Wealthsimple.
Yeah.
So.
Indeed.
Yeah.
I love that. And we've seen that in other markets too. In the UK, they've got this current account switching service that one phone call to your bank, and they are mandated to facilitate the switch of all of your pre-authorized payments to the bank of your choice. So to increase that competition, it's really important.
Absolutely.
On the first day, in the main stage, we talk a little bit about the relationship between innovation and regulation. And I'm a big believer. There's a term in the that was coined in the UK, innovation by regulation. And we've seen that driving other markets, certainly in the UK and Brazil, et cetera. How have you at Wealthsimple been able to advance your innovation within this complex regulatory environment?
Another great question. Thank you for it. I think often when it comes to regulation or even, complex regulation, as you say, to me and at Wealthsimple, when we're starting to build a product, the first thing you want to do is just understand it, without any bias or opinion, is go in and understand, what was actually, from a first principle standpoint, what was the intention of that regulation? Because most things have been implemented for a good reason, whether it's to provide stability, security, eliminate fraud, or to help people make better decisions and put some guardrails in there. And so anytime we're building a product, we try to understand what is the regulation around that space and why. What's the true intent of that regulation? So that as we imagine the best possible experience with that product, we also keep in mind how to fulfill that intent. What's the best way to make sure that we're still compliant, that we're meeting the true intent of that regulation? And then we've, through our amazing product and regulatory team and our great partners, I think built relationships where we talk through different approaches to make that solution work. And so that is one prong of our two-prong approach: understand the true intent, make sure we're compliant, build the best possible experience within it, and partner with people. And then the second prong is sometimes a regulation was put in place at a time where certain technology didn't exist, and the world has changed a lot, and it continues to change rapidly. And then it's working to say, okay, what was the true intent of the regulation? Is there a way to still fulfill that intent, but change it given where we're at in the world? And I think a great example of that, and something I'm proud of how our teams worked to advance in the past, was the idea of a wet signature, that you had to go into a branch, sign a paper document to open an account. We have, digital signatures that oftentimes can actually be more secure through DocuSign. And so the idea that now through providing identity, verifying that identity, having digital signature, people are able to open accounts without going into a bank or into a physical office has improved the experience for Canadians as well, because with busy lives, shuttling kids around, that wasn't always possible. And so again, I think that working to change regulation where it makes sense, understanding the true intention, and building a product that way is sort of how we have approached the landscape. Yeah.
Awesome. And as a fellow engineer, I really appreciate you going to first principles.
Yes.
Always remember those first principles. Wealthsimple's done this spectacular job since 2014, not even 10 years, building up to a mandate. You got 38.7 billion assets under management. That's tremendous. So you've done this fabulous job as an innovator in a quite a conservative industry. Looking ahead, Radhika, where do you see the biggest opportunities for those who are trying to disrupt this industry and service Canadians?
When we think about building something, developing a new feature or product, and to anyone who I think is thinking of disrupting any industry or the financial services one, you have to start with your customers. And I think starting with your customers and thinking about what are their unmet needs right now? What are their pain points? What are things they want to be able to do but can't? Or things that they don't know they should be able to do because they exist elsewhere in the world that we can bring to them. And I think thinking about how best to improve customer lives and experiences and address that pain or opportunity is where you start. And once you can pinpoint, a particular space, then you just think of the best possible experience you could provide in that space. And it might seem unattainable given everything you know at a particular moment in time, but it should be audacious. It should be big. At Wealthsimple, we started with helping everyone achieve financial freedom, right? It sounds big. It's gnarly. How do you get around that? And then you break it down, right? So you start with what's something you're trying to address. Think as big as you possibly can, and then break it down into, okay, knowing that that's where we want to get, what's the first thing that we could do that sort of moves us in that direction? And then just build it. And, there's always going to be reasons not to, there's always going to be hurdles, but you just figure out, okay, what needs to change so that what I want to do or offer can exist? And you build it, and then you keep moving. And so when it comes to where are the greatest opportunities, I think it is around looking at capabilities that people elsewhere in the world have around managing, controlling, making the most out of their money, potentially bringing them to Canada. Something that's top of mind for me and us at Wealthsimple is around how do we create more access for people to financial products, ways to invest that traditionally haven't been available to others. And so we've created ways for our customers to invest in investment vehicles that were traditionally for the very wealthy, where you needed to have several $1 million, things like private credit, private equity, a venture fund. And those I think are particularly interesting, especially for investors who want to grow outside of traditional markets. And then I think money movement is huge, right? We've been talking about real-time payments. We've been talking about open banking, and the idea that you can have real-time transactions allows you to make better decisions. I think is a huge opportunity, and the ease with which, with the right constraints, that you can move money, I think is a huge opportunity. We actually built a peer-to-peer payments environment at Wealthsimple, which for customers who are at Wealthsimple and want to transfer money back and forth to each other and use it, find incredibly delightful, and they love it, and they just wish it was available everywhere. And that's the kind of possibility that I think can exist, and certainly through more access, more real-time money movement and payments are some opportunities. And then I think, our financial lives are complicated, and any way to make them easier and meet customers' pain are opportunities for people as well.
I love that, digging right into the customer delight quadrant.
Yes.
That's awesome. So we're almost at the end of our conversation, and I want to skip to a question that was not part of the original script. But women in payments, as the founder of Women in Payments, I really want to ask, because you've had this fantastic career with leadership roles across North America in different tech and fintech organizations, and you're well acquainted with the excitement and the imperatives around innovation. Radhika, can you tell us what inspired you to pursue this career, and what advice would you give to the rising stars in our audience?
Thank you for that question. If I think back through my whole career, and even how I am now and how I've always been someone who was inspired by breaking new ground, doing something that hadn't been done before, or thinking through a problem that maybe hadn't been solved. Like even in school, I wanted the really hard, open-ended question to think through. And so for me, a driving factor has always been, is there an opportunity to do or tackle something that hasn't been done? Wanting to do the hard stuff. And I think being open to failure when you decide that that's something that inspires you, that you want to do. Because that's if you're open to failure, you'll take a few more risks, you'll access opportunities, I think, that someone who didn't have that mindset wouldn't. So for me, certainly, I think being able to break new ground has been a motivator. And then the advice that I would have for people is really just that. If that's what inspires you, go chase it. Like, run into the fire, or run towards the action. And sometimes that means, I think about times in my life in the 2000s when the big buzzword was globalization, and I wanted international experience, and I never chased titles or positions, but experiences. And so I made sure that I could go work somewhere else in the world, right? At that time it was Europe, and that was an amazing experience. And then when the tech scene was exploding, I was like, I just need to be a part of that. I need to be as close as possible to where the action is. And so, I had a young baby at the time, but me and my husband decided we were just gonna move to California to be closer to the action and see what happens, right?
Of course.
And that just led to more opportunities. And then I think always intentionally choosing the areas that were less defined, trying new things. And so I guess my advice is chase experiences, go where the action is, be comfortable with failing. It's the only path, I think, to access bigger opportunities or learn more. So all of those things, to me, inspired me and would be the advice I would share.
So inspiring. Thank you so much,
My
Radhika. It's been
pleasure.
a great conversation.
Thank you.